Hey guys, what's going on? So today I'm going to be going over every team's draft, kind of giving them a letter grade at the end, which, is a bit elementary, I guess, but it's a good way generalized to think about how these teams did at the drafts. And I'm going to go in alphabetical order here. And I just have the draft results up on Cap Friendly, starting with the Anaheim Ducks. I will be going in alphabetical order, so let's just get right into it. So the Ducks took Pavel Mintyukov 10th overall, which I really like. I like Mintyukov a lot. And they took Gaucher at 22, which I don't like as nearly as much. But I feel like Mintyukov is a bit risky, and Gaucher is a bit of a safer pick. So they're kind of doing a little bit of risk management there, I think. In the second round, they got Noah Warren at 42, which I think is a really good pick. I don't think he has a lot of offensive upside, but could be a really solid shutdown defenseman in the NHL. So I think that's a great pick. 53, they got Tristan Luneau, which is not a guy that I really love, but at 53, I think that's decent value. After that, all these other players I think are guys that I'm not too familiar with. They took Ben King at 107, Connor Vidston at 139, Michael Callow at 154, and a Russian player whose name I'm not going to try to pronounce here at 178. So those guys likely are not going to be NHL players, or if they are, not major game changers. But if one of those guys hits, then sure, fine, that's great. Their top four picks, though, all four of those guys I could see being legitimate NHL players. Luneau is probably the least likely to be really impactful at the NHL level, but if he hits, he could be decent. And Mintyukov could be a really, really solid power play guy at the NHL level. So overall, I think I'll give the Ducks a B. All right, let's move on to the Coyotes then. They had an interesting draft. So they got Logan Cooley third overall. Of course, famously, they passed on Shane Wright, but they really liked Cooley. I don't know. I would have drafted Shane Wright. If you want Cooley, though, I think Cooley has a slightly higher upside, but we'll see. At 11, they actually traded up. So they traded 27, 34, and 45 to the Sharks in exchange for pick 11, which they used to draft Connor Geekie. I don't like this trade at all for Arizona. I don't really like Connor Geekie that much. I definitely don't like him at 11. So pretty questionable, I would say. At 29, they had arguably the biggest reach in the draft, in my opinion, with Maverick Lamoureux. He's a guy that is not. He'll probably play in the NHL just because of his size, but I don't think he will be a contributor. In fact, he might be a below replacement value player who just gets ice time because of his size. So don't like that pick at all. So it is not looking good for the Coyotes so far here. At 36, they took Artem Duda, which is fine. I don't really have a strong opinion about Duda either way. At 43, they got Julian Lutz, which is a pick that I like. But again, not a guy that has a ton of upside. I think Lutz will be a solid not fourth line, but bottom six player who can play a really solid bottom six role for them. So outside of Connor Geekie, that's probably their best pick so far. But even then, the Connor Geekie pick is a bit questionable with Shane Wright being available. At 67, they took Amito Matica, which is fine. Not a player I have a strong opinion about either way. Although, given some of the players that were available, I thought they could have done better there. At 94, they took a guy I'm not too familiar with. And I think the rest of these guys I'm not going to be too familiar with. At 204, they did get Adam Zlinka, which I think that's a guy who has a decent bit of upside. Could be a steal. He's another Slovakian player, actually. I did not realize that at first, or I didn't remember that anyways. But yeah, that could be pretty good value at 204 because that's a guy that I think has a legitimate chance of making the NHL. These other guys, I don't know. These literally two players I don't really know anything about, and Jeremy Langlois as well. But overall, I think their draft was very questionable, especially considering what assets they had coming into today. Logan Cooley is a guy you can definitely build around, but I'm not sold on Connor Geeky. I am really, really not sold on Maverick Lamoureux. Dude is okay. Lutz is good, but isn't going to be like a really highly thought of core piece. I mean, he might be part of your core, but he's still like a bottom six guy, right? Not really what you think of when you think of core players. Matica could be good, but overall, I don't know. I think I'm gonna give the Coyotes a D. A D. I'm tempted to give him a D plus, but I'm gonna mark him down for that Lamoureux pick because that was bad. Oh, Atlanta Flames. That's not a team anymore. Apparently, they just have every team that's ever existed in here. Boston. I don't think they drafted anybody I'm super familiar with. Matthew Poitras was their first pick, and even he is not a guy I'm super familiar with. Reed Dick at 186, a goalie. One of the more highly thought of goalies coming into the draft, but he fell. A lot of goalies went ahead of him. Could be a decent steal. You never know with goalies, especially late in the draft. Other than that, I don't really have anything to say about Boston. They just didn't have that many picks, and they didn't have any high picks at all. Poitras is fine, I guess. So I'll give him a C. The Sabres. Here we go. Sabres had an interesting draft. They drafted Matthew Savoy, 9th overall, which is a player I like a lot. I had him at 6 on my board. They took Ostland at 16, so they're kind of doubling down here because both of these players I see as a bit risky, but have pretty high upside. At 28, they took Yuri Kulik, which kind of balances that out a bit. A little bit of risk management there. He's a safer player. At 41, they took Topias Leninin, a goalie, which was the first goalie off the board, and I was very surprised by that. I had him in my top 100, just barely at 100, but I think, if I remember correctly, the main thing I have with him is he's kind of small. See if it has his size on here. I take it back. He's 6'5". I might be confusing him with Hugo Havlid. But I don't know. He's a goalie. I wouldn't have drafted him 41 because he probably would have fallen a lot further than that. I'm guessing. I don't know. Plus, Buffalo already has Devin Levi and Ukko-Pekka Luukkonen coming through the pipeline. So that was a really kind of a weird pick in general. 74, they got Victor Nuchev, which I think if you're going to reach on a Russian player, probably not the one I would have reached for at 74. At 106, though, they took Mats Lindgren, who is a player that I like a good amount. I think he will be a solid NHL player. So to get that at 106 is a pretty solid pick. 134, they got Vesov. I don't know how to pronounce this guy's first name. Okay, but Komarov. He is a guy I know of. Again, a Russian player probably would not have reached on him for Russian players. At 187, they got Gustav Carlson, which I thought was great value. I had him ranked in my top 100. And other than that, those are really the only players I'm familiar with. They also got a couple of other guys here, Jake Richard and Linus Schoden. But generally speaking, I think they did pretty well. The biggest question mark for me is the Leninin pick. But overall, I think they did quite well. I'm going to give them A minus. So Calgary had 3 picks. They got Topi Roni at 59 and a couple of guys I'm not familiar with late in the draft. Roni is a solid pick at 59, though, I think. I don't know. C, I guess. I don't really feel comfortable giving him a better grade than that, given they only had 3 picks. Let's see. Hurricanes. Carolina had a very interesting draft. So their top pick was not until 60th overall, but it was a big one with Gleb Trikazov. And Carolina clearly went into this draft with the philosophy that everybody else is going to let these Russian players fall. Let's just take them. In fact, if I remember, actually, I could have sworn they traded up for this pick, but I guess not. Maybe they traded up. for another Russian player. Paravolov? That was in July 24th, though. Anyways, Gleb Trigazov at 60. I had him in my top 10. I think that's an amazing pick. There is a bit of risk, obviously, with Russian players right now, but in terms of talent, that could be the steal of the draft. At 71, they took Alexander Paravolov. Probably not a Russian player I would have reached on there, but I can understand it. At 101, they got Simon Forsmark, who is not a player I'm super familiar with. At 124, they took Cruz Lucius, which is an interesting pick, probably mostly based off of his well, I shouldn't say based off his pedigree, but is he as good as his brother? No. We'll see with him. 124, it's fine. If he doesn't make it, then that's that. At 156, they got Vladimir Grudinin, who is one of my favorite defensemen in this draft. Again, I had this guy in my top 10. He went 156. I understand I had him ranked a lot higher than other people, but a lot of people at least had him in the first round. It was actually kind of funny. On stream, I was saying, watch Carolina draft Grudinin right here because they're always an interesting team to watch at the draft. And lo and behold, 10 seconds later, they drafted Grudinin. And yeah, I think that also could be one of the hugest steals of the draft. Hugest? Whatever. At 171, they took a guy I'm not too familiar with. And then at 205, they took another Russian player in Alexander Pelovin, which at 205, if you want to reach on another Russian player, sure. Overall, I think there is a ton of risk in this draft, given all the Russian players they drafted. And it's not just the fact that they're Russian either. Just based off the players that they are, Trigazov is risky as a player. Grudinin is also kind of risky. Pelovin is a little bit risky. And then you add on all the Russian factors, and it's a ballsy draft. But honestly, I love it. They got two of my favorite players in the draft. Two players inside my top 10 at 60 and 156. And that just blows my mind. Carolina gets an A. Chicago, they, I believe, traded up for Kevin Korchinski at 7, which is fine. I don't like Kevin Korchinski that much, but it's a relatively good pick. At 13, they got Frank Nazar, which is a pick I like a lot. And at 25, they took Sam Renzel. Not a player I've seen a lot of, given that he played high school prep this year. But it sounds like he has a lot of upside. I had him ranked 51, but I felt like he probably should have been ranked higher than that. So we'll see. At 39, they took Paul Ludwinski, which I think is a solid pick as well. 57, Ryan Green is a solid pick. 66, Gavin Hayes is not a player I'm super familiar with. And at 81, Samuel Savoy, I think, is a decent pick for that range. Aiden Thompson at 90, not another player, or another player I should say that I'm not super familiar with. And these last three guys, also guys I'm not familiar with. They did end up with a lot of picks though. That's 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. They ended up with 11 picks. And I think at least 3 or 4 of these guys are probably going to become solid NHL contributors. So overall, it was a really good draft. It didn't blow me away. I think the best player to come out of this draft for them will probably be Frank Nazar, maybe Korchinski, but I'll give them a B+. Okay, moving on to the easiest team to grade in this draft class. It's the Colorado Avalanche. They had a 6th-round pick and a 7th-round pick, so they took a defenseman and a goalie. Don't know anything about him. I'm going to give him no grade, actually, just because they really had no picks, and the ones that they did, I know absolutely nothing about these guys, so I don't really feel comfortable grading them on this performance. Columbus is an interesting team at the draft as well. They took David Jiricek, 6th overall, which is a really solid pick. I think that's great value for Jiricek. I had him 4th on my board, if I remember correctly. They took Denton Mateychuk at 12, which I think is a bit of a risky pick. I probably wouldn't have taken him at 12, but the upside is definitely there. If you're going to reach on a player, they got to have upside, and he does have the upside, so there's that. At 44, they took Luka Delbo Beluz, not a player I really like. So at 44, it's not terrible. I would have taken him later in the second round than that, maybe like 10, 15 spots lower than that, but it's not a terrible pick at 44. At 96, they took Jordan Dumais, which I think is a decent pick. I'm not expecting a lot from Dumais, but at 93, that's pretty much around where I had him ranked, so that's decent value. At 109, they took Kirill Dolzenkov, which probably not a Russian player I would have reached on here. Again, I would have reached on Grudinin, but he does have upside, so it's not egregious. At 138, they took a goalie who I know absolutely nothing about, but another Russian, so a bit risky. And then at 203, they took James Fisher, who I don't know much about either. So overall, I think there's a bit of risk here with the Russian players and Matejchuk. Really, though, I think they got one really, really solid contributor with Jiricek and maybe a couple of role players. So it could have been better. It definitely could have been a lot worse, though. So I'll give them a B. I'll give them a B. Okay, on to Dallas. This is a team. This is my second favorite team, and I think they had a pretty interesting draft. They actually made no trades, which is interesting. At 18, they drafted Leon Bichel, which I think is high for Bichel, but he is probably going to be an NHL player, so there's that. At 50, though, they took Christian Cairo, one of my favorite defensemen in this draft class, even if I didn't have him ranked quite that high. Well, actually, I had him ranked higher than this, but I mean, relative to other defensemen in the draft. I love that pick a lot. That's easily my favorite pick for Dallas. Although at 179, their last pick of the draft, they got Matthew Simenov, who could be another huge steal. I had him ranked easily in my top 100, and the big problem with Simenov is his skating. His skating is a major issue, which probably turned off all these other teams. But the rest of his game is honestly really solid. So if he can improve on his skating, he could easily be an NHL player. And if he improves a lot, he could even be a top 6 guy. So that's a guy who they're kind of betting on. They have experience drafting players with questionable skating in the past with guys like Jason Robertson. So could be a huge steal there. These other guys I don't know a lot about, but overall, I'll give Dallas a B as well. Okay, Detroit. Detroit is always an interesting team to watch at the draft, and this year was no exception. At 8, they took Marco Casper, which is a pick that I don't really like that much. Yeah, Casper to me is just doesn't have the upside of a top 10 pick, but he's an NHL player. At 40, they took Dylan James, which is where I actually don't know a lot about. I feel like that is probably a bit of a reach there. At 52, they took a Russian, so a bit risky there. And the rest of these guys really, I don't know too much about. They made a lot of trades, or at least they acquired a lot of these picks in trades. And yeah, honestly, I really don't know much about any of these guys. I didn't quite realize that when all was said and done. They did have a lot of picks though. 3, 6, 7, 8. They had 9 picks, so that's decent. Overall, I'm not blown away by their draft. I'm tempted to give him a D, but it's Steve Yzerman. He knows what he's doing. So I'm not going to pretend like I know better than Steve Yzerman. I will give them a C plus, just because I'm kind of giving them the benefit of the doubt there. But honestly, some of these picks are kind of questionable given some guys that were on the board, in my opinion. Okay, now we got the Edmonton Oilers. At 32, they took Reed Schaefer, which I think is kind of questionable given who was on the board. But he's an Edmonton kid, so sure. And that was pretty much it. After that, they had 3 late round picks. Yoel Mata at 222, I think is a great value, but still, we'll see if he actually becomes an NHL player or not. Overall, I don't think there's too much to rank to grade them on here, but I will give them a C minus, primarily because of that Reed Schaefer pick. Just not the guy I would have drafted at 32. All right, now we got the Florida Panthers here, and they didn't have any earlier picks either. Their first pick was Marek Alsher, is not a player I'm really familiar with. Sandis Villamanis, I thought was a decent guy in the 5th round, and that's about it. They did have, oh wait, actually they had one more pick, but that I want to talk about. But just a bunch of late picks in a relatively weak draft. We'll see what happens. One pick that I am interested in is Jack Devine, which they managed to get at 221. I had him ranked 81st overall, so I think that's a crazy value. I can't believe he fell that far, but there were other guys ranked in that range that didn't get drafted at all. So Devine, definitely great value, but we'll still see whether or not he actually makes the NHL. Overall, I'll give them a C plus. Again, I don't think there's too much here to really grade them on. All right, the Kings, with their first pick in the 2nd round, selected Jack Hughes, which I thought was pretty good value at 51. And after that, really not a lot of guys I'm super familiar with. They got Angus Booth at 116, which is a decent option on defense. At 148, they got Otto Salin, which is another decent option on defense, I guess. Not really anything crazy, given that these are all late round picks, but yeah, not too much to grade them on here. I was a little bit surprised. It felt like they were doing more stuff as I was watching the draft live, but apparently not. Jack Sparks at 180. They drafted a lot of defensemen here. Well, 3 out of their 5, 8, 9 picks. So 3 out of 9. Overall, again, I'm going to give them another C because there's just not that much here to grade them on. Okay, the Wilds took Liam Ogren at 19 and Daniil Yurov at 24, which is pretty interesting. Ogren at 19, I like. I think that's very solid. Yurov at 24, I think is pretty good value, but again, kind of risky with the whole Russian player factor. At 47 and 56, they got Hunter Height and Ryger Lorenz, respectively, which I think both of those guys are pretty solid value in the 2nd round there. Very solid picks overall. And at 185, they got Cervak Petrovsky. I had Petrovsky ranked 64th in my list, and most people had him ranked roughly in that range, like 60 to 100. So getting him at 185, I think, is crazy good value. I'm a little surprised Montreal didn't take him at some point, given they drafted a whole bunch of other Slovaks. But I think that could be one of the good steals of the draft, especially for a late round steal there. Overall, I'll give Minnesota a B. All right, so now with arguably one of the more controversial drafts from this draft class, and that is the Montreal Canadiens, of course, famously passing on Shane Wright at 1st overall, instead taking Uri Slavkovsky, not the pick I would have made. At 26, they took Philip Machar, which I think is a relatively safe pick. Perhaps they're kind of bouncing out the risk with Slavkovsky. I don't think Slavkovsky is that risky either, but definitely risky in a sense that you're not taking the best player available, in my opinion. At 33, they took Owen Beck, which is fine. Not a player that I love. At 62, though, they got Lane Hudson, which is a player that I like a lot. I had him ranked 38th on my board. So that's great value there, I think. 75, they got Vincenz Rohrer, which I think is pretty solid value. And that might be it for the players that I'm really familiar with, but they did have a lot of picks late in the draft as well. So you never know with some of these guys. They, of course, took their fair share of French Canadians. And overall, I don't really know what to give them. I really like the Hudson pick. And I do like Slavkovsky, but you got to go with Shane Wright, man. I'll give him a B minus. Okay, now we got the Nashville Predators here. Their first round pick, they got Joakim Kamel at 17, which I think is really solid value. Could have gone higher in the draft for sure. I had him ranked 13th on my board, I think. At 82, they got Adam Ingram, which again is solid value. I had him ranked in the 50s, I think. or actually, it might have been the late 40s for him. So I think that's good value. Casper Kulanumi as well. I had ranked at 50 or 49, so they get him at 84. Another good value pick. None of these guys I think have crazy high upside. Kamel could be a pretty good goal scorer, and then the rest of these guys I don't know too much about. But yeah, overall I think it's a solid draft class, especially considering how many assets they had coming in. I'll give them a B. All right, now the New Jersey Devils, another team that passed on Shane Wright. They of course took Simone, I should say, Nemec, second overall. Interesting pick. Passing on Shane Wright is kind of a ballsy move. I will say that. I know they have center depth, but you can never have too many centers. You could always put one of them on the wing. I feel like they've got pretty good defense right now as well, so I don't know. And then with their next pick at 46 overall, they drafted another defenseman, and Seamus Casey. Seamus Casey is a player I like a lot, and getting him at 46 I think is great value. He does have skating issues, so he could be a guy who potentially doesn't make it to the NHL, but if he can become a better skater, then he could be really solid. In round 4, they had some interesting picks. They got Tyler Brennan, which was generally thought of as the top-ranked goalie coming into the draft. A few goalies ended up going ahead of him. Getting him at 102, I think, is probably good value, but honestly, it's always hard to tell with goalies. At 110, they got Daniil Orlov, which is a decent Russian player to swing on here, but personally, I would have preferred them swinging on Grudinin. And after that, all these other guys I'm not too familiar with, except Artem Barabosha, another Russian player. To swing on him at 198, I think is a pretty decent move. I think there's upside there. So overall, I'll give them a B as well. I don't feel comfortable giving them an A, given that they pass on Shane Wright. Okay, now we got the New York Islanders, who did not have a first round pick, but at 65, they took Callie Odelius, which is one of the best players available, I think, at that point in the draft. So that was a really solid pick. After that, though, they didn't get too many guys I'm super familiar with, just Isaiah George at 98. Not a guy who has a ton of offensive potential, I don't think, but a really solid defensive defenseman who could play a solid middle pair shutdown role at the NHL. So I think at 98, that's great value and definitely an Islanders style pick given the type of hockey they play. So again, not a lot of picks, but I think they got two solid NHL contributors relatively late in the draft. So I'll give him a B plus. All right, now we move on, of course, to the other team in New York, the Rangers. Again, another team that doesn't have a first round pick, but at 63, they got Adam Sikora, which I think is a great pick there. I had him, I believe, right at the beginning of my second round or late in the first round. At 97, they got Bryce McConnell Barker, which I think is pretty good value, but not a crazy player, not a ton of upside there, I don't think, but could be an NHL player. And after that, Maxim Barbashev at 161. This is a Russian player that I would swing on. I believe he's already come over to North America, though, which helps things out a little bit. Of course, I'm pretty sure he is. Oh, man, what's his name? The other Barbashev from the Blues. They are brothers, I'm pretty sure. Could be a good pick there at 161. Overall, though, again, there's not too much to grade them on here. I think they did well with the picks they had, so I'll give them a B. Okay, now moving on to the Ottawa Senators. Again, another team that lacked a first round pick. Probably a team that could have used a first round pick, but really, they drafted a bunch of players that I don't really know much about at all. Even with their first pick, Oscar Pederson, or not Oscar Pederson, Philip Nordberg, not a player that was really on my radar, especially not in the second round. So interesting to say the least. 72, Oscar Pederson, another guy I haven't heard much of. Thomas Hamara, 87, I think is a decent pick, but still a bit of a reach for me. Outside of that, yeah, I'm gonna give him a D, just because like I did have 100 players ranked, and Nordberg wasn't in my top 100. Pederson not in my top 100. Hamaro, I don't believe was in my top 100 either, but he was close. He was definitely in consideration. Holiday, they could have, and there were guys that are falling they could have gotten late in the draft as well, which they passed on as well. Yeah, definitely getting a D there. And now moving on to the Philadelphia Flyers. They had a pretty interesting draft. They got Cutter Gauthier, 5th overall. Not a player I would have drafted 5th overall. You're definitely getting an NHL player, sure. I don't think there's crazy high upside there, though. At 69, they got Devin Kaplan, which is a pretty good pick. I was surprised how late he went, so I think that's good value there. And these other 3 guys, I'm not really familiar with. Overall, I'll give them a C plus for the Kaplan pick. They definitely could have swung for the fences a bit more at 5, but I do understand wanting to get a relatively safe pick. I'm not gonna mark them down too much for that, but yeah, C plus I think is fine, especially considering the amount of assets they had coming into the draft. All right, next team we have up is the Pittsburgh Penguins. At 21, they got Owen Pickering, and at 150, they got Zam Plant, which I think is great value. Not necessarily going to be like considered a huge steal, but could be an NHL player. I had him ranked in my top 100, so I thought that was pretty good value there. Sergey Merostra at 118, not a Russian player I would have reached on there. I would have been more comfortable reaching on him with one of their 6th round picks, but sure, why not? Overall, they didn't have, I mean, they only had the 5 picks. Owen Pickering, I do like. I think at 21 is pretty much even value. That's just about where I would have drafted him. So they got a good player with Planther at 150. I'll give him a B minus. All right, now moving on to my favorite team in the NHL, and that, of course, is the San Jose Sharks. So the most notable thing they did overall was trading down from 11 to 27 in that deal with the Coyotes. Of course, they did get picks 27, 34, and 45, which at the time I thought was a great trade, great value. But let's look at what they actually did with those picks. So at 27, they drafted Philip Bystedt, which was a player I had late in my 2nd round. Don't really like that pick at all. He's big, but I don't know. He has a good shot. That's about it for me. Don't really like that at 27 at all, especially considering Brad Lambert was available. I was very, very kind of pissed, to be honest, that they passed on Brad Lambert at 27. At 34, they took Cameron Lund, another player that I don't think has that much upside at all. Another larger center. They do need centers, so they drafted 2 with their first 2 picks, but these are guys that are not going to be playing with their top prospects, I don't think. If those other guys like Eklund and Gushin are going to be playing in the top 6, these guys are not top 6 centers, in my opinion. So, yes, you need centers. If there's no centers that you like that really have a ton of upside, or the upside that you need, just draft another position. You could use defenders as well. You could never have enough goalies. I mean, you don't want to draft goalies in this draft this high, but just draft somebody with upside. Brad Lambert could play center. Jagger Fergus went what, 35th overall to Seattle? Man, I don't know. At 45, they got Matthias Havlid, which was my favorite pick of theirs from the draft. I think that is the best pick they made. Havlid could be a solid offensive defenseman in the NHL. After that, they got Michael Fisher at 76, which is fine, I guess. They drafted a goalie at 108, who I don't really know that much about, but kind of interesting, I guess. They generally need goalie prospects. I mean, this guy probably won't really be anything, but you never know. At 140, they took a Jack Furlong, which is a player that I don't know a ton about, but I heard some good things about him, and they actually did highlight him on the draft on ESPN Plus, at least, which at this point in the draft, they were only highlighting once every 5 or 6 players, if that. So maybe there's something there. You never know. At 172, they took Joey Muldowney, who I believe... No, I'm confusing him with somebody else. Yeah, he's pretty much just a guy, I think. But at 217, they drafted Rhys Larbach, their last pick of the draft. This is a guy who came out of high school prep. But interestingly, he did play with the junior Sharks organization until his U16 season. So he's always put up good numbers, but numbers in those leagues don't really mean that much to me, and neither does high school prep numbers, where he had 107 points in 51 games. But it's high school prep, so that doesn't mean that much to me. But this is a guy that they have seen a lot of, given that he's from San Jose and played in the Junior Sharks organization. So maybe there's something there. Maybe that could be the saving grace for their draft class if this guy becomes a thing. Because really, the rest of these guys, I'm not happy with. Especially their first two picks, Bystedt and Lund, are just really boring picks, but also picks that I would not have taken in those spots at all. They're probably guys they could have gotten later in the draft. They could have... I don't know. I don't like their draft at all. I'm giving the Sharks a D+, which honestly I think is a little bit generous. Okay, so next we have the Seattle Kraken, and they had one of the best drafts, I think, this season, which is really good for them because they kind of needed it. By some miracle, at 4th overall, they did manage to get Shane Wright, and they did not galaxy brain it and pass on him like everybody else did. So, good job, Seattle. At 35, they got Jagger Fergus, one of my favorite players in the draft. I had him ranked 11. Could be one of the steals of the draft. He has a great shot. Will score a lot of goals in the NHL. I have no doubt about that. At 49, they got Yanni Nyman, which I think is fine, decent value. At 58, Nicholas Coco, which is not a player I was really on my radar, especially in that range. So maybe a bit questionable there. But at 61, they did get David Goyette, which brings it back up because I think Goyette has a bit of upside, and I like that pick a lot for 61. At 68, they got Ty Nelson, which is another notable player. A player that kind of fell down my boards a lot as the season went on. But at 68, I think he still is pretty good value there. Ben Mcdonald at 91. There's other players there that I would have drafted ahead of him. But, he's fine. And these last few guys, I don't really know too much about. Tucker Robertson at 123, though, actually is decent value, I think. Probably not an NHL player, but he could be an NHL player. I think he has... I think he probably should have gone a bit earlier in the draft than 124. So, given his potential, probably third line ceiling at best for him. But really, if he makes the NHL at all, that's all you're really looking for from a 4th round pick. And you never know. He has potential to maybe develop his offensive skills a little bit and maybe surprise some people. Overall, I think Seattle had a really solid draft. I am giving him an A, no doubt about it. The next team we have are the St. Louis Blues, and their draft was a bit uninspired. At 23, they took a Jimmy Snuggerud, which is fine. Probably a bottom 6 guy. I don't think there's that much upside there, but an NHL player, sure. At 73, they took Alex Santeri Kasimaki, excuse me. Decent player, pretty good value, I guess. I don't know. That's probably about where I would have taken him. At 88, Michael Butchinger. That's a bit of a reach for me. At 120, they took a Russian player that let's see, Koramsolov, if I'm saying that correctly. I am familiar with him a little bit, and again, probably not a Russian player that I would have swung on here. Again, it would have been Grudinin. These last couple guys I don't know too much about either. Overall, I'll give him a C. It strikes me as a very average draft class. Next team we have is the Tampa Bay Lightning, and really they only have one draft pick that I really want to talk about, and that is Isaac Howard at 31. I think that's a very good pick for 31st overall. Could be a top 6 player for him, so Even though the rest of these guys I'm not really sold on, these guys I don't know too much about. But again, they're late round picks, so you never know. But Lucas Edmonds is fine, depth winger of the in the future, maybe. They are really good at developing players in general, so it wouldn't surprise me if Lucas Edmonds turned into a solid like bottom six winger. But Isaac Howard, really, one, if you watched the draft, then you saw this guy's style. He's got tons of confidence and just great style in general. I really love Isaac Howard even before I really noticed that about him. But at 31, he could be a steal in this draft class. Overall, I'll give the Lightning a B just based off that pick alone. The next team I want to talk about really quickly is the Toronto Maple Leafs. At 38 overall, they took Fraser Minton, which I think is a bit high for him, but reasonable. At 95, though, they took Nicholas Moldenhauer, which I thought was quite good value for him. Again, not a guy who's going to be like a top six forward or blow you away, really. Probably a third line guy at best, but I think at 95, it's really solid value given the likelihood he plays in the NHL. I think is pretty solid. At 122, they took a guy I'm not really that familiar with. And at 135, they took Nikita Grebenkin, which, again, not a Russian player I would have swung on here. I would have gone for Grutinin, but maybe, I guess, Russian players are really, really hard to predict in this year's draft. And with their last pick of the draft, they took a guy, basically. Based off of the Moldenhauer and Minton picks, though, it's fine. I feel like I'm giving a lot of teams C's or average grades in general, but they really don't have that many picks, and most of them are, well, they have one pick in each round other than the first. And so, I don't know. It's a C for me. All right, next we have the Vancouver Canucks. They made a bit of an interesting pick, I think. At 15, though, they got Jonathan Lekarimäki, which is pretty much even value for me. I had him at 14 on my board, I believe. Could score a lot of goals in the NHL, so I think he fits into that Vancouver system pretty well. At 80, they made the move that basically everybody was probably hoping they would in drafting Elias Pettersson. So, of course, they have Elias Pettersson and Elias Pettersson now. If he makes the NHL, there is a question mark there. Maybe he won't, but I think there's a good chance he does. And I cannot wait for the days where Pederson is playing with Pederson. That would just be absolutely fantastic. Overall, though, still, I think a pretty solid pick at 80th overall. At 112, they got Damon Gardner, which I think he's kind of just a guy, to be honest. And the rest of these guys are just players as well. Overall, though, I will give him a B for Lekarimäki and Pederson. So, the next team we have here is the Vegas Golden Knights, and really they didn't draft that many players I'm particularly familiar with, but Matthias Sapovaliv in the second round is decent. Probably could have got him later than that, but probably not at 79, so overall I think that's it's a decent pick. At 79, they got Jordan Gustafsson, which I think is a bit of a better pick. I think that's pretty good value for Gustafsson. Although, I mean, a lot of these guys really could have gone just about anywhere, so it's a little bit hard to judge because it's really varied. It seems like opinions on players really varied strongly from team to team. The rest of these guys I'm not too familiar with, except for Ben Hemmerling at 177. Is he a long shot to make the NHL? Maybe, but I think that's really, really good value at 177 with the skill Hemmerling has. If he does make the NHL, could be a decent scoring player. Probably a third liner who can score, maybe a second liner. So you never know with him, or you never know with any prospect really. But overall, I'll give the Knights a B minus. All right, now we've got the Washington Capitals. They made some interesting picks, starting with their first round pick in Ivan Miroshnichenko. I think that was a bit high to take Miroshnichenko. I do like it though, just because of how much I like him. But there is risk there with the whole Russian player factor. Maybe they have a little in there with Ovechkin. Maybe that helps them out a little bit with Russian players. I don't know. At 37, they took Ryan Chesley, which is perfectly fine. That's like about where I expected him to go. At 70, Alexander Suzdalev, I think, is fine value as well. Ludwig Pearson, fine. The rest of these guys, I don't really know anything about. These two guys they got in the third round are pretty big maybes, but that both of them went pretty much where I expected them to go, so pretty average picks in general. Overall, though, I will give them a B because of the Miroshnichenko pick. I do like it, and I think maybe they have a little bit of safety having Ovechkin in their corner. Finally, we have the Winnipeg Jets, and they had a pretty good draft. At 14th overall, they took Rutger McGroarty, which is not a pick that I really liked that much. But they more than made up for it at 30 by drafting Brad Lambert. I can't believe that he fell to Winnipeg at 30, especially with the Sharks picking at 27. But I'm just going to ignore that. At 55, they took Elias Salamonson, which I think is a pretty good pick as well. He's a guy that was falling for a lot of people throughout the season, myself included. But at 55, I think that's really solid value. Maybe a little bit of an Atu Ratu type factor there in how he fell throughout the season. At 77, they took Danny Zilkin, which is another player I like a lot. I think that's a really solid pick. And at 99, they took Garrett Brown, son of former Shark Dustin Brown. And honestly, I think this is a really good pick as well. I think Garrett Brown has a bit of offensive upside that you might not think of because of if you're just looking at his points production this season. But he could be a really solid player, especially to get him in the fourth round. I mean, that's pretty much right where I had him ranked. I believe I had him ranked at 98. But I didn't actually expect him to go that high, so I'm quite pleased that Winnipeg took him there. These last two guys I don't really know anything about, but based off the rest of their picks, I'm gonna give Winnipeg an A minus. So that is it for this video. Thank you so much for watching, guys. If you did believe it deserved a like, do give it a like. If you wanted to see my final top rankings, my top 100, and you want to watch it after the draft as a bit of a hindsight thing, I guess. I don't know. I'll leave that right up here for you guys to watch. If you don't want to watch it, that's cool too. Or if you've already seen it, then you're Gucci. But yeah, thank you to everyone who stuck around for the live streams the last couple days. We didn't have a ton of viewers, but it was a ton of fun for me. I really love interacting with you guys in the chat. So thank you guys for watching. Hopefully next year I will be live streaming the draft as well, and it's going to be even more awesome. We'll have more people. I'll have more information on more prospects. So if you are a NHL draft nerd, this is absolutely the channel for you. I'll be making draft content for the 2023 draft starting right away pretty much. And all that being said, guys, have a nice day.